Before we begin, slowly, just allow yourself to relax. You're about to travel back in time, not as a history lesson, but as a quiet experience. A journey into the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, the cradle of early civilization, where rivers shaped cities and cities shaped history. Imagine yourself standing in this ancient world. The air is warm, the ground is dry and timeless, and everything feels distant yet present. There is no rush here, no urgency, only the slow rhythm of history unfolding. As you begin to walk, you are not just observing the past, you are moving through it. The sound of distant rivers, the soft wind over stone paths, the quiet life of ancient cities, all begin to surround you. As you begin to walk, you are not just observing the past, you are moving through it. The sound of distant rivers, the soft wind over stone paths, the quiet life of ancient cities, all begin to surround you. And with every step you take, your thoughts begin to slow, your breath becomes softer, your body becomes lighter. You are safe here. You are calm here. And now, as we move deeper into this ancient world, we begin our journey through Mesopotamia. And slowly, very gently, you may begin to drift.
Not away from the story, but into it. Let the ancient world guide you. And as we continue, you may find yourself slowly falling asleep while walking through history.
The night is calm, not completely silent, but soft. The kind of quiet that feels alive, as if the world itself is slowly breathing. You are walking slowly, without effort. The ground beneath your feet is warm stone, still holding the memory of the sun. Each step is steady and quiet, blending into the rhythm of the night. Above you, the sky stretches wide and endless, filled with distant stars. In the distance, you begin to see a city, ancient, vast, and resting peacefully in the night. Babylon. It doesn't call to you, yet you move toward it. The road feels calm, and time itself seems to slow with every step. A gentle breeze passes by, warm and soft, carrying the scent of earth and water. You take a slow breath and begin to relax even more. The night continues, and you are still walking. As you come closer, tall walls rise before you, softened by moonlight. Torches flicker gently, casting a warm and steady glow. You step inside, and the air changes, cooler, softer, more calm. Somewhere nearby, you hear water flowing, a quiet and steady sound that draws you forward. You follow it slowly through silent streets. Everything feels distant, peaceful, and unhurried. And then rising before you in soft layers, you see the hanging gardens. Water flows gently from one level to another. Leaves move softly in the night air. You take a step forward, then another. The world becomes even quieter as you enter. The garden breathes slowly, and the night continues. You move deeper into the gardens, and the world becomes even quieter. Not empty, but softer, as if every sound has been gently lowered. The air is cool here, comfortable. It touches your skin like a calm breath. Water is everywhere now. Not loud, not rushing, just flowing, steady, endless. You follow a narrow stone path between the terraces. Above you, layers of green rise into the night sky. Below you, water moves slowly through carved channels. Each drop of water falls gently from one level to another, soft, rhythmic, like the garden itself is breathing in silence. You slow down without even noticing, your steps becoming lighter, quieter. The sound of water surrounds you now, not overwhelming, but complete, filling every space between the stones, between the leaves, between your thoughts. Somewhere nearby, a small stream flows under stone arches, hidden, protected, constant. You pause for a moment and simply listen. There is no need to move quickly here, no need to reach anywhere. The garden does not ask anything from you. It only exists and invites you to exist with it. Leaves shift softly above your head, a gentle movement, almost invisible, like the night is breathing through them. Water continues to flow, layer after layer, stone after stone, time after time. And you realize something simple. You're no longer just walking through the garden. You are part of its silence now. Everything slows even more, thoughts fading gently into the background, leaving only the sound of water and calm. The hanging gardens feel endless here, not because they are large, but because they are still. And in that stillness, you begin to relax even deeper. The night continues quietly around you, and you continue with it. You stay in the quiet of the gardens. Time here feels softer now, almost as if it no longer moves forward in a straight line, but flows gently like water. The sound of the streams never changes, always steady, always calm. You begin to walk again, but slower than before, as if even movement has become optional. Stone steps lead you slightly higher into the terraces, each step warm from the memory of the day. Above you, hanging vines sway almost invisibly in the night air, soft shadows moving across stone walls. You notice how the water is guided through small carved channels, each one carefully shaped, each one letting water pass without resistance. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is simply continuous. Somewhere deeper in the garden, water falls from a higher level, a soft, distant sound like a whisper repeating itself through stone. You follow that sound without thinking, not because you must, but because it feels natural. The air becomes even cooler as you move upward, and more still. Every breath feels easier now, deeper, slower. You pass beneath an arch covered in plants, leaves gently brushing the stone above your head. For a moment you stop again, just standing there, listening. Nothing calls you forward, nothing pulls you back. There is only this moment, this quiet space between water and night. And in that space, everything feels balanced, soft, complete. The garden breathes slowly around you, and you breathe with it. The night continues, and you continue gently within it. You move even deeper into the upper terraces. The higher you go, the quieter everything becomes. Not because sound disappears, but because it no longer feels separate from you. Water still flows beside you, but now it sounds distant, like a memory of movement rather than movement itself. The stone here is older, smoother, shaped by time and constant water. You place your hand gently against it as you walk. It feels cool, still, grounded. Above, the garden opens slightly, revealing more of the night sky. Stars scattered like quiet thoughts across darkness. The air is lighter here, almost weightless, as if the garden is slowly releasing you from everything unnecessary. A soft breeze moves through the leaves, barely noticeable, yet it changes nothing and everything at the same time. You pause again, longer this time. There is no direction now, no path that feels more important than another. Only stillness, only breath. Somewhere far below, water continues its endless cycle through stone channels. But here, at this height, it feels like a distant heartbeat. Steady, calm. You begin to realize the garden is not something you are moving through anymore. It is something you are resting inside. The distinction between you and the garden begins to soften, like the edges of a dream gently fading. Everything becomes simpler, quieter, lighter. And in that simplicity, there is rest. The night holds you gently, and you no longer feel the need to go anywhere else. You remain in that quiet place. The upper terraces of the garden are now still around you, not empty, but complete in their silence. Even the sound of water feels distant here, like it belongs to another layer of the world. You stand between stone and sky, between movement and stillness. And for a moment, nothing changes. The night feels suspended, as if time itself has slowed down enough to be barely noticeable. A soft wind passes through the garden, touching leaves, then disappearing, without direction, without urgency. You breathe in slowly and hold nothing in return. The air feels clean, light, calming in a way that asks nothing from you. Below, the city of Babylon rests quietly. Its distant presence no longer feels separate, just part of the same calm world you are in. You take a small step forward, then stop again, not because you have arrived somewhere, but because there is nowhere else to reach. The hanging gardens are no longer something you observe. They are something you are surrounded by, something you exist within. Stone, water, leaves, night, all blending into a single quiet rhythm. Even your thoughts begin to slow, fading gently into the background, one by one, until there is almost nothing left to think, only feeling, only stillness. The garden does not change, and it does not need to, because it is already enough, exactly as it is. And you are enough here too, without movement, without effort, just present, just resting, just part of the quiet night. You stay there a little longer without needing to move. The hanging gardens are completely still around you now, not silent in absence, but silent in fullness. Every sound that remains feels distant and softened. Water, wind, leaves, all blending into one gentle presence. You notice how even your awareness feels lighter, less focused, less sharp, as if the garden is slowly carrying your thoughts away from you, one by one. There is no need to hold on to anything anymore, no need to follow anything. Just this moment, this quiet space, this still night. The stone beneath you feels steady and warm from the day that has passed. The air above you feels endless and calm. And between them, you simply exist. Far below, Babylon continues its quiet life, but it no longer feels distant, only connected, like part of the same breath. You take another slow breath and release it without effort. Nothing changes, and yet everything feels softer. The garden does not guide you anymore. It simply holds you. And in that holding, there is comfort, there is calm, there is rest. You no longer feel the need to continue walking because the journey... And now, even that sense of movement begins to fade. Not suddenly, but gently, like a final layer of awareness slowly dissolving into the night. The hanging gardens remain around you, but they no longer feel like a place you are in. They feel like a feeling, soft, endless, calm. The sound of water continues somewhere far away, but it no longer pulls your attention. It simply exists, like a distant memory of peace. You are no longer searching, no longer observing. There is only stillness now. The air feels heavier in a comforting way, as if it is gently holding you in place, not restricting, just supporting. Your thoughts slow even further, each one fading before it can fully form, until there is almost nothing left to follow. Only awareness, soft and quiet. The garden, the city, the world beyond it, all begin to feel distant, not gone, just far away. And what remains is this moment, this calm. And as you drift even deeper into stillness, the boundaries between sound and silence begin to fade completely. The hanging gardens are no longer something you can clearly sense, not because they are gone, but because they are no longer separate from you. Everything becomes softer, quieter, slower. Even the idea of movement feels distant now, like something that belongs to another time. There is only calm, only presence, only the gentle rhythm of stillness that holds everything together. You do not need to understand anything anymore. You do not need to follow anything. All that remains is this quiet sense of being, light, soft, endless. The sound of water, the breath of wind, the memory of stone and garden, all of it fades into a single quiet feeling, peace. And as you drift even deeper into stillness, the boundaries between sound and silence begin to fade completely. The hanging gardens are no longer something you can clearly sense, not because they are gone, but because they are no longer separate from you. Everything becomes softer, quieter, slower. Even the idea of movement feels distant now, like something that belongs to another time. There is only calm, only presence, only the gentle rhythm of stillness that holds everything together. You do not need to understand anything anymore. You do not need to follow anything. All that remains is this quiet sense of being, light, soft, endless. The sound of water, the breath of wind, the memory of stone and garden, all of it fades into a single quiet feeling, peace. And now there is nothing left to follow. No path, no sound, no direction. Only a deep and quiet stillness that surrounds everything equally. The hanging gardens are no longer a place in your mind, not even a memory. Just a soft presence, blending into the calm of the night. Even time feels distant now, as if it has slowed down enough to disappear completely. There is no movement forward and no return. Only the feeling of being held gently by something vast and peaceful. You are not thinking anymore, not searching, not observing, just resting. The air feels weightless. The silence feels complete. And in that completeness, everything softens even more. Thoughts dissolve before they form. Feelings dissolve before they rise, until only calm remains. A calm that does not change, a calm that does not move, a calm that simply is. You are not separate from it anymore. You are part of it. And as the night continues without end, you continue with it, gently, quietly, and completely at rest. And now even the thought of continuing begins to fade. Not as something lost, but as something that is no longer needed. Everything has already softened into stillness. There is no direction left to follow, no distance left to cross. Only this quiet, endless calm. It does not grow. It does not shrink. It simply remains, like the gentle space between thoughts, like the pause between breaths. You are no longer holding on to anything, not even awareness itself. Just resting deeply, quietly, without effort. The world feels far away now, not gone, just unimportant in this moment of peace. And yet, nothing is missing. Everything feels complete. The stillness does not ask anything from you. It does not guide you. It does not shape you. It simply holds you gently, without resistance. And in that holding, you begin to let go even more. Not into sleep, not into wakefulness, but into something softer than both. A place where nothing needs to continue, and nothing needs to end. Only calm remains, and you remain with it, fully at ease, fully still, and completely at rest. And now, there is nothing more to continue. No story left to follow, no place left to reach. Only this final stillness, soft, complete, and endless. The garden, the city, the night, all of it gently fades away, not disappearing suddenly, but slowly, like a distant dream losing its shape. What remains is calm, pure, quiet calm. You do not need to think anymore. You do not need to follow anything. There is only rest, deeper than thought, softer than silence. And as this moment settles completely, even the feeling of time begins to dissolve. There is no before, no after, only now, stretching endlessly, without effort, without change. You are safe here, completely at ease. Nothing is required of you anymore. And so, you simply rest, gently, quietly, fully at peace. And the night continues, without end, as you drift deeper into calm. And now even that final sense of continuation begins to soften. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to follow. Only a deep and quiet presence that fills everything equally. The idea of distance fades. The idea of movement fades. Even the feeling of you becomes lighter, softer, almost weightless. Everything is still here, and yet nothing needs to be noticed anymore. The world does not end. It simply becomes quiet. Like a long breath slowly settling into silence. There is no effort in this place, no direction, no urgency, only calm. A calm that does not ask for attention, a calm that does not change. You are not moving toward anything now. You are simply resting within what already is. Soft, still, endless. And as this quiet continues, even that awareness begins to gently fade into peace, until there is nothing left to do and nothing left to become. Only rest, only stillness, and you remain there, completely calm, completely quiet, and gently at sleep. Long before great empires ruled the world, there was a quiet beginning. In the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, between two great rivers, life began to organize itself into something new. Small settlements slowly began to grow, houses made of mud and stone, simple streets forming over time, and people learning to live together in a shared space. One of these early places was a city called Ur, a quiet beginning of something much larger. There was no rush in this world, no loud expansion, only slow growth, shaped by rivers, soil, and time. The Euphrates River flowed nearby, bringing water, life, and movement to the land. Farmers learned to follow its rhythm, planting, waiting, and harvesting in silence. The city slowly became more organized. Paths became streets, homes became neighborhoods, and life became shared between people who once lived separately. There were no sudden changes, only gradual transformation, as if the land itself was gently shaping human life. And as you imagine this ancient city, you are not observing history from far away. You are standing inside it. The air is warm and still. The sound of water is distant but constant, and everything feels simple and calm. Time moves slowly here, almost like it is resting. And as you walk through the early streets of Ur, you begin to feel something familiar. A quiet stillness, the same kind of calm that gently guides you toward sleep. The ancient world continues around you, softly, quietly, as you slowly begin to drift within the history of Mesopotamia. As the city of Ur continued to grow, something important began to change. Growth brought more people, more trade, and more conflict. When people began living closer together, disagreements became more common. Land disputes, trade arguments, questions of fairness and punishment. For a long time, these issues were solved differently by different people. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was written. But as Ur expanded, this system started to fail. That is when a ruler named Ur-Nammu began to act. He ruled the city during a time when order was becoming necessary for survival, and he understood something clearly. A growing city cannot rely only on memory and opinion. So he introduced something new, laws that were written down, not spoken differently by each person, not changed depending on who had power, but fixed, recorded, visible to everyone. These laws dealt with everyday life, trade, property, disputes, and justice between people. For the first time, people in Ur could understand the rules that governed them in the same way. This marked one of the earliest steps toward organized law in human history. And in that moment, Ur was no longer just a growing city. It was becoming a structured society. As these changes spread through daily life, Mesopotamia slowly moved toward a new era, where civilization was no longer only about survival, but about order. Trade, property, disputes, and justice between people. For the first time, people in Ur could understand the rules that governed them in the same way. This marked one of the earliest steps toward organized law in human history. And in that moment, Ur was no longer just a growing city. It was becoming a structured society. As these changes spread through daily life, Mesopotamia slowly moved toward a new era, where civilization was no longer only about survival, but about order. As the city-states of Mesopotamia continued to grow, life became more complex. In early cities like Ur, people followed simple traditions to solve their problems. But as populations increased, this system slowly began to break down. Different cities had different rules, and even within the same city, justice could change depending on who was judging. What was considered a crime in one place could be completely acceptable in another. This created confusion and instability across the region. During this time, Babylon began to rise. What was once a small city slowly became a powerful center controlling surrounding lands. At the heart of this rise was a ruler named Hammurabi. Hammurabi was not only focused on conquest or expansion, his true goal was order. He understood something important. A kingdom cannot survive on strength alone. It also needs structure. So he introduced a new idea for his time, written laws that applied to everyone in the kingdom. These laws were not based on memory or personal judgment. They were carved into stone and displayed publicly for all to see. For the first time, justice became visible and consistent. People no longer had to guess what was right or wrong. The rules were the same for everyone, regardless of wealth or status. This transformed Babylon into more than just a powerful city. It became an organized state built on law and structure, and from this moment, Mesopotamia entered a new era where the challenge was no longer just building cities, but creating systems that could govern them. As Mesopotamia entered this new era, power slowly began to shift again. Babylon was no longer just a rising city. It was becoming a center of influence across the region. But history in this land never stayed still for long. New kingdoms were always forming. New rulers were always emerging. And the balance of power was constantly changing. Even with Hammurabi's laws, even with written justice, the region was still shaped by ambition, expansion, and control. Because in Mesopotamia, order and conflict always existed side by side. Cities could rise quickly and fall just as fast. And as time moved forward, new powers would begin to challenge Babylon's influence, bringing stronger armies, larger territories, and harsher rule. But the foundation had already been laid. The idea that a civilization is not only built by strength, but also by laws, systems, and structure. And this idea, first written in stone in Babylon, would spread far beyond Mesopotamia, shaping every empire that came after it. From this point on, history was no longer just about survival. It was about control, organization, and legacy. And as the world of Mesopotamia continued to evolve, new empires were already waiting to rise, bringing the next chapter of ancient history. As time moved forward in Mesopotamia, new powers began to rise from the north. These were not quiet city-states like before. They were organized, disciplined, and expansion-focused kingdoms. Among them, one name would become especially feared and remembered: the Assyrians. They built their power on strict order, strong armies, and complete control over conquered lands. Where earlier civilizations focused on building cities, the Assyrians focused on controlling entire regions. Their expansion was fast and often harsh. Cities that resisted were not easily forgiven, and their reputation spread far beyond their borders. But like all powers in Mesopotamia, they were also part of a repeating pattern: rise, expansion, control, and eventual decline, because in this land no empire stayed permanent. The same rivers that gave life also witnessed the fall of countless rulers and cities. And while new empires rose and fell, the legacy of earlier civilizations remained. The idea of written laws, organized cities, and structured rule continued to shape everything that came after. Mesopotamia was no longer just a collection of cities. It had become the foundation of civilization itself. And from here, history would continue toward even greater empires, including the rise of Babylon once again, under its most famous kings, and the golden age that would follow. After the rise and fall of early empires in Mesopotamia, Babylon would rise once again, but this time stronger than before. Centuries passed, and the city slowly transformed into a center of power, culture, and architecture. At the heart of this new Babylonian era stood one of its most famous kings, Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II. Under his rule, Babylon reached its greatest height. The city was no longer just a political center. It became a symbol of civilization itself. Massive walls surrounded the city, designed not only for protection, but also to show its strength. Great structures were built across Babylon, wide streets, monumental gates, and impressive temples dedicated to the gods. Among the most famous of these structures was the grand entrance to the city, the Ishtar Gate. Ishtar Gate. Its deep blue walls and detailed reliefs reflected the power and wealth of Babylon during this time. Visitors entering the city would immediately feel its dominance and importance. But Babylon was not only about power, it was also about culture, knowledge, and identity. Astronomy, writing, mathematics, and religion all developed further during this period. Everything that had slowly begun in earlier Mesopotamian cities now reached a peak under Babylon's golden age. And yet, even in its greatest moment, the cycle of history in Mesopotamia remained the same. No empire stayed forever. Because in this land, every rise carried the seed of its own decline. And as Babylon stood at its peak, history was already preparing the next transformation. A reminder that even the greatest cities are part of a much larger story of time. After the golden age of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II, the city remained powerful for a time. But history in Mesopotamia was never stable for long. Great empires in this land rarely faded in a single moment. Instead, their strength slowly weakened over time as new powers began to rise around them. Babylon, once the center of civilization, began to face pressure from expanding kingdoms beyond its borders. The same cycle that had shaped Mesopotamia for thousands of years was happening again. Rise, dominance, and gradual decline. Even the most advanced cities, with their laws, temples, and grand architecture, could not escape this pattern. Because Mesopotamia was not defined by one empire, but by a continuous flow of civilizations replacing one another. And as Babylon's influence slowly weakened, new forces from different regions began to shape the future of the ancient world. These powers would carry forward what Mesopotamia had created: writing, law, and organized society, but they would expand it into something even larger. The legacy of Babylon did not disappear. It spread. It influenced future empires, future cities, and future systems of governance. What began in places like what was written in early laws, and what was perfected in Babylon, became the foundation for later civilizations far beyond Mesopotamia. And so the story of this land does not truly end here. It transforms. Because Mesopotamia was never just a place of empires. It was the beginning of civilization itself. Let's move slowly on. In ancient Egypt, life was shaped by a single natural system, the Nile River. Each year, at a predictable yet powerful moment, the river would rise beyond its banks. This was not simply a natural event. It was the foundation of an entire civilization. Before sunrise, the Nile often appeared calm, its surface still, almost motionless. But this silence was deceptive, because beneath it a slow and powerful transformation was approaching. The river dictated where people lived, how they farmed, and when they worked. In this world, nature was not separate from life. It was life itself. Daily life in ancient Egypt was not measured by clocks. It was governed by natural cycles. Sunrise marked the beginning of activity. Communities started their work early, before the heat became intense. Labor was organized collectively, with farming, construction, and water management shared among groups. Silence in the morning was not emptiness. It was preparation, a signal that life was about to begin its daily rhythm. Survival depended on coordination rather than individuality. The Nile's annual flooding was the most important agricultural event in ancient Egypt. During this period, the river overflowed its banks and covered the surrounding land. When the waters eventually receded, they left behind a thick layer of dark, nutrient-rich silt. This natural deposit acted as a highly fertile soil. It allowed crops to grow in an otherwise dry environment. Without this cycle, large-scale agriculture would not have been possible. The entire food system depended on the predictability of this flooding pattern. Despite its benefits, the Nile was never fully predictable. Some years the floodwaters were too low. This resulted in poor soil coverage and reduced harvests. Other years the waters rose too high. Entire fields and settlements could be damaged or destroyed. Thus, the Nile represented both stability and uncertainty at the same time. Ancient Egyptian society lived within this constant balance between abundance and loss. Over time, the Egyptians developed methods to observe and record the behavior of the river. Flood levels, seasonal changes, and agricultural outcomes were carefully monitored. These observations formed one of the earliest environmental knowledge systems in human history. Instead of attempting to control nature, they adapted to it. This adaptation became the foundation of long-term survival. The Nile was not just a river. It was a natural calendar, a system, and a guide for civilization. Ancient Egyptian life was built on repetition and cycles. Flood, planting, growth, and harvest. These stages repeated every year with remarkable consistency. There was no fixed beginning or end, only continuity. As long as the Nile continued to flow, the civilization continued to exist. A system not built on control, but on rhythm. A rhythm defined entirely by nature. Beyond the immediate agricultural cycle, the Nile flood system shaped the entire structure of ancient Egyptian civilization. It was not only a source of water, it was the backbone of administration, economy, and social order. Because agricultural output depended entirely on the river's behavior, centralized coordination became essential. Food production had to be measured, stored, and distributed with precision. This led to the development of early bureaucratic systems. Officials were assigned to monitor land, record harvest yields, and manage grain storage facilities. In many ways, ancient Egypt became one of the earliest examples of a state organized around environmental dependency. The concept of time itself was influenced by the Nile. Instead of abstract calendars, Egyptians divided the year based on natural phases of the river. Three main seasons emerged: the flooding period, the planting period, and the harvest period. Each phase dictated human activity across the entire civilization. This structure created a predictable rhythm in an otherwise unpredictable natural environment. However, this predictability was never absolute. Minor variations in flood levels could still disrupt entire economic cycles. Storage became one of the most critical innovations of the time. Grain was collected and preserved in large, state-controlled granaries. These storage systems acted as buffers against environmental instability. In years of abundance, excess production was stored. In years of shortage, stored grain was redistributed to prevent famine. This mechanism reduced the impact of Nile unpredictability and allowed population stability over long periods. The Nile also influenced settlement geography. Most major cities developed along narrow strips of fertile land near the riverbanks. Beyond these zones lay vast desert regions that were largely uninhabitable. This created a highly concentrated population structure. Urban centers, agricultural zones, and administrative hubs were all tightly linked along the river's course. As a result, communication and transport were primarily water-based. The Nile functioned as both a resource and a transportation network. Religious and cultural interpretations also emerged from this dependency. The annual flooding was often associated with divine order. Rather than being seen as random natural events, the cycles of the river were integrated into belief systems. The consistency of the flood reinforced the idea of cosmic balance and renewal. This helped reinforce social stability during uncertain environmental conditions. By observing the long-term patterns of the river, ancient Egyptians achieved something remarkable for their time. A sustainable system built not on controlling nature, but on aligning with it. This balance between adaptation and dependency defined their civilization for thousands of years. And even today, the Nile remains one of the clearest historical examples of how geography can shape human history. As the Nile cycle continued year after year, its influence extended far beyond agriculture. It gradually shaped the entire economic and social structure of ancient Egypt. Because survival depended on the river's consistency, society developed around a centralized system of coordination. Food production, storage, and distribution were no longer isolated activities. They became part of a larger organized framework. The redistribution of grain played a key role in maintaining stability across the population. After harvest seasons, surplus crops were collected and stored in state-controlled granaries. These granaries were not simple storage buildings. They functioned as economic safety systems. In years of strong floods and abundant harvests, grain reserves increased significantly. In contrast, during weak flood years, these reserves were released to prevent widespread famine. This mechanism allowed ancient Egypt to survive environmental fluctuations that would otherwise destabilize agricultural societies. Over time, this system required administration. Officials were appointed to measure harvest yields, track land productivity, and record agricultural output. Written records became essential for managing resources across large regions. This led to one of the earliest known bureaucratic systems in human history. Administration was not separate from daily life. It was embedded within it. Settlement patterns also reflected this organization. Most population centers developed along a narrow, fertile strip directly influenced by the Nile. This strip was surrounded by vast desert regions, which acted as natural boundaries. As a result, human habitation was highly concentrated. Cities, farms, and administrative centers were closely connected through river-based transportation. The Nile itself served as a logistical network. It enabled movement of goods, people, and information across long distances with relative efficiency. This geographic concentration also influenced political control. Since most of the population lived along a single corridor, centralized authority could be maintained more effectively. This contributed to the development of a unified state structure earlier than in many other ancient regions. Power was not distributed across isolated settlements. It was aligned along a single environmental axis. Religious and cultural interpretations also evolved alongside these systems. The repeated flooding cycle was not viewed as random chaos. Instead, it was perceived as a structured, natural order. The pattern of destruction and renewal became symbolic of continuity and balance. This interpretation reinforced societal stability during uncertain environmental periods. Natural events were integrated into a broader worldview that emphasized harmony rather than unpredictability. Education and knowledge transfer also played a role in maintaining this system. Experience-based understanding of the Nile was passed across generations. Changes in flood intensity, soil behavior, and agricultural timing were carefully observed and remembered. This accumulated knowledge created long-term environmental awareness. It allowed society to adapt without needing constant technological innovation. Instead, adaptation was based on observation and continuity. Over centuries, the Nile ceased to be viewed merely as a river. It became the organizing principle of civilization itself. It defined where people lived, how they worked, how they governed, and even how they understood the passage of time. Without the Nile, the structure of ancient Egyptian civilization would not have been possible in the same form. But because of it, one of the most enduring civilizations in human history was able to develop and sustain itself for thousands of years. By this stage, the Nile was no longer just an environmental force shaping agriculture or settlement patterns. It had become the underlying structure of time, stability, and meaning within ancient Egyptian civilization. Every cycle of flood and recession reinforced a fundamental truth. Human survival in this region was not based on control over nature, but on adaptation to it. As the river continued its annual rhythm, a deeper understanding of continuity began to emerge. The same fields that were submerged one season would reappear fertile in the next. The same land that seemed lost beneath water would return transformed. This repetition created a perception of renewal embedded into everyday life. Nothing was ever truly permanent, and yet nothing was ever completely lost. This cyclical structure influenced how time itself was perceived. Unlike linear systems where time moves from a defined beginning toward an end, the Nile introduced a repeating model of existence. Flood, recession, cultivation, harvest, and then repetition. Each cycle was both an ending and a beginning. This blurred the boundary between past and future. Over generations, this cycle became deeply embedded in cultural consciousness. The river was not only observed as a physical phenomenon, but also interpreted as a symbol of order within change. Even unpredictable variations in flood strength were incorporated into this worldview. Instead of being seen as disruption, they were understood as part of a larger, continuous system. At the level of society, this created a form of resilience that did not rely on resistance to environmental forces. Instead, it relied on synchronization. Infrastructure, agriculture, administration, and settlement were all designed to follow the rhythm of the Nile. When the river rose, activity shifted. When it receded, production resumed. When the land reappeared, cultivation began again. The entire civilization moved in response to this pattern. In this sense, ancient Egypt did not attempt to dominate its environment. It structured itself around it. This distinction is critical in understanding its long-term stability. Rather than fighting against uncertainty, it absorbed uncertainty into its system. Variability became expected, and expectation reduced instability. Even the concept of continuity was redefined. What modern perspective might interpret as disruption, flooding, land loss, seasonal change, was instead integrated as a necessary phase of existence. Each transformation of the landscape was part of a larger repeating system that never fully stopped, only shifted, only evolved. As centuries passed, this relationship between civilization and river remained consistent. Dynasties rose and fell, but the Nile cycle continued without interruption. Empires changed, rulers changed, technologies evolved, yet the fundamental rhythm remained the same. The river maintained its course, and civilization maintained its alignment with it. From a historical perspective, this creates a unique case study, a civilization not defined by conquest or expansion alone, but by environmental synchronization over thousands of years. Its endurance was not accidental, it was structural, built into the geography itself, and ultimately, the Nile represents more than a river in historical analysis. It represents a system in which nature and human organization were inseparably linked. A system where stability was not achieved through control, but through repetition, not through domination, but through adaptation. As the cycle continues beyond recorded history, the same pattern persists even today in a different form. The river still flows, the land still responds, and the logic of that ancient system remains one of the clearest examples of how geography can shape not just civilization, but the very structure of human existence.